Welcome students, welcome to this presentation on market mechanism and market failure. We know that invisible hand or self-interest guides the economic decision making of the producer and the consumer. The consumer is guided by the self-interest of maximizing his utility, while the producer is guided to maximize its firm's profit. The interaction between the producer and the consumer appear to be uncoordinated. They seem to be automatic, and this automatic working of the market decides the price. And this price does not require this price settling does not require any intervention. There is no external body who helps the consumer to decide how much should be purchased or the producer to decide how much should be sold. There seems to be some kind of coordination, and at a determined price, because of the interaction of the consumer and the producer, a price is fixed and the quantity is fixed. So once the price and quantity is fixed, we understand that the market is in a state of equilibrium, and once it has reached a state of equilibrium, there may not be immediate tendency to change the price or output. So when the markets are in equilibrium, we understand that what is the consumer's demand for goods, the same is what is supplied by the producer, and therefore there are no excesses and there are no shortages in the market. In such a free market economy, we say that consumers and producers are price takers and have no role in making the price. Let's also quickly look into what are the functions of price. One of the basic problems of an economy is the problem of allocation of scarce resources. Who guides the allocation of scarce resources in a free market economy? In such an economy, the consumers and firms interact to determine this allocation of resources among competing users. So resources move towards those sectors where there is a shortage of goods available, and resources move away from those sectors where resources are available in plenty. Thus, price directs the activities of the producers, of the consumers, and of the resource suppliers. When we have allocative efficiency, we find that there is no wastage of resources in the economy, and resources are allocated in such a way that a combination of goods and services are produced, which can maximize the society's output. Now, you may ask this question: what about trivial commodities that are produced? Is it necessary that these kind of goods, which really do not maximize a society's output, be produced? Well, that is beyond the scope of this kind of positive economics. It falls within the purview of normative economics, which will decide whether such goods should be actually produced or consumed. In a free market economy, there will be demand for those goods, even though they may seem valueless to many others, because there is somebody or the other wanting that kind of good in the economy. The concept of allocative efficiency can be explained very easily with this help of a simple diagram. We have the demand curve and the supply curve interacting with each other at point P, and the quantity is Q. But there are two terms here, the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. The consumer was willing to pay any price from D to P, but he or she actually finally pays only price P. So the feeling that the consumer could have paid any price above P and actually pays P, so that triangle DPR is known as consumer's surplus. He actually does not pay that price because the price is settled much lower than what the consumer was willing to pay for that commodity. In the same way, there is something known as the producer surplus. The producer would have been willing to sell the commodity at let us say point C. It's not marked there, at point C. So the seller was willing to sell at point C, but the seller finally sells the product at point P. So the difference between what the seller was willing to sell at point C and actually sells only at point P. So that triangle area PRC is known as producer's surplus. So the producers are getting more than what they expected, the consumers are getting lesser than what they expected to pay. When that happens, we tend to reach a situation where the two are in equilibrium, and then we say when the producer's surplus is equal to the consumer surplus, then the market has settled the quantity and the price for both the producer and the consumer. Rationing by price. This is another important function of price in a free market economy. Like we understand that in any economy, there are shortages that will appear at some time or the other, and many times of essential commodities. The World War has shown that rationing is an important way of allocating scarce resources among all the people, because shortage of food could put people into hardship. Therefore, the ration system was introduced where coupons were given to individuals, and by presenting the coupon, one would get a share of the scarce resource, which was food. Now, besides food, there are many commodities that go in scarce supply at some time or the other in our economy. In our own economy, we have seen shortages of edible oil, we have seen shortages of food, of cement, of many commodities of this kind. There have been shortages, and there used to be rationing at some time in our long economic history. So when rationing is done, then everybody is assured of a small quantity of what is available. Then those who feel that they do not need that commodity may actually withdraw from that market. So those who can buy an alternative to that, they would leave this market, and they could buy it elsewhere, some other commodity. And those with less buying power, who do not have access to other commodities, will actually buy this. So this allows the very needy people to make use of the rationing system rather than those who can afford to buy some other commodity. The rationing by price guarantees that goods will be purchased by the buyers who value it the most. So those who do not want it, they may not buy that. Now, rationing of scarce resources prevent prices from rising. Otherwise, there is a tendency for prices to rise, and those who do not have adequate purchasing power will not be able to get them, and they could be deprived of food or whatever essential commodity it is. This contraction of demand by some people withdrawing from the market because of the rationing system is known as the rationing effect. And if the government did not resort to uh, rationing, what could happen is there would be illegal activity of black marketing and hoarding. So once the hoarding and black marketing happens, then goods further are taken away from the market, and this complicates the supply issue further. So prices indicate to the government of shortages, and prices also indicate to the needy to buy that, and for those who do not require it, they exit the market. Prices also act as signal both to the producers and to the consumers. It directs where the resources should be moving into. The shortages are reflected in high prices, whereas surpluses are reflected in low prices. So rising price will indicate that the consumers to reduce the consumption or to exit the market completely. And to the producer, falling prices can indicate that he too could exit the market, because, or he could produce less because that profit was not giving that market was not giving enough profit. On the other hand, we could also see that when the prices are high, it indicates to the producer that there is a shortage of goods in that particular market, and therefore there is a need for increased production of those commodities, or there is a need for expanding the production. So in this particular way, the market will experience increased production of those goods where there is a shortage, and less goods where there is no need for, or less requirement of that good. Consumers too will decide what goods to buy and when to exit the market if the prices are too high. So this signaling function is done by the prices, which makes the decision of the consumer and the producer to suit the emerging market situation. So excess supply will push down the prices, and thus eventually what will happen is prices are very flexible, and when prices are flexible, this excess supply will be wiped out, or the shortages will disappear because there will be more production that will be carried out. The prices can also act as incentive. It can guide the producers what to produce more and which to produce less. Consumers' choice is also expressed as demand in the market. So, how do we consumers respond to a change in price? The consumers may give this information to the producer and ask for certain kinds of goods. For example, they may ask for fuel efficient cars. So when they express their demand for fuel efficient cars, then it provides an incentive to the producer to make investment in the production of fuel efficient cars. You will find that in a free market economy, much of the production that takes place happens when the producers are showing, indicating or preferences for certain kinds of goods, and the producers produce those kind of goods for them. So this firm does it because the firm knows that when consumers are asking for a particular good, then the chances of making profits are more in that particular sector. Now, associated with this is the extension of supply along the existing supply curve. So the supply curve will move to the right, which indicates that there will be more production because of the change that is expected from the consumer. This is called as the incentive effect. In the long run, firms are likely to adopt newer methods of production, like in the example of the fuel efficient cars. And this incentive can be either positive or negative. So it depends on what kind of goods are being produced and what do consumers want, or what can producers actually produce. So these are the role that price mechanism plays in signaling the producer consumer, or providing incentive for the producer to manufacture something, or the economy to allocate its resources between sectors based on the shortages and excesses in the economy. Now we come to an important topic. If price can do these kind of function, does it mean that the prices can actually perform these function efficiently, or does it happen that sometimes the markets fail? Market failure is a very common word that we use here, and it is important as a student of economics to know what does this market failure mean. We use this word very in a very general sense. Market failure is a situation because it arises because the market is not perfect, and there are certain conditions that can prevent a market from succeeding in reaching equilibrium, and the price mechanism fails. So we saw that price mechanism is expected to signal, is supposed to allocate or provide incentive. Now these activities may not be performed by the price, in which case it is not able to deliver the socially optimum quantity of goods and services in the economy. In such cases, we say the market has failed. So market failure is associated with the possibility or non-possibility of providing the goods and services as required in the economy. There is a mismatch between the demand and supply. Either there is too much of supply at some time, or there could be too much of demand at some at other times. So there is a mismatch between the supply side and the demand side in the economy, and that is what we call that mismatch gives rise to what is called as market failure. There is an issue of value judgment, or where important goods are not produced, and goods that are not really important gets produced in a market economy, which is very much a part of the working of the market mechanism. When bicycles are needed in an economy in larger number, we may find that more cars are produced, very high-end cars are produced in an economy. Now in such a case, we cannot make a comment on that, because the market is being met for those high-end cars, and there might be a situation where the bicycles are more needed in economy. So that again does not fall within the purview of positive economics. That depends upon distribution of income and how the society operates. Let's look at what are the causes of market failure. The first reason we attribute to this market failure is that of externalities. What is an externality? Now, externality is when one person's economic behavior not only affects him or her well-being, but it has the potential to affect the well-being of other people who are not a part of this decision making. So A takes an economic decision, and A's economic decision not only affects his or her life or health or well-being, but also affects the life and well-being of people who are not directly involved with that decision at all. Now, these other parties, what we are talking about, they may get certain benefits about from this decision, or they may have to bear certain costs of this decision. Nevertheless, that cost or that benefit which is available to the third party free and for which he has not paid the cost is a part of being missed out from the market. So market mechanism fails to capture those kind of activities, and that is why we say externalities in the market are a reason for market failure. Now, market failure in terms of externalities can be both positive externality and negative externality. Now, what is a positive externality? Example here is sending children to school, or individuals taking vaccination during this pandemic. Now, what happens when an individual takes a vaccine? When a person takes a vaccine and assume that he pays for this vaccine, then that person is not only protecting himself or herself from getting infected by the disease, but also contributes to society's good. It provides to society's good in that sense. He, to that extent, that transmission of the disease is stopped from his point. Now, if the transmission of the disease is stopped at his point, then A, B, B, C, and D are enjoying the benefit of less disease in the society. In which case, for which they do not pay any cost. Or they enjoy the benefit of less prevalence of the disease, but they don't have to pay for the cost that this person has incurred. It is the same when children go to school. When children go to school, the family bears the cost of the child's education, but the society gets the benefit of having an educated society, where the society does not actually pay for the child's education, where the parents have paid for it. So in such a situation, we call it as positive externality. In the case of positive externality, the benefits that accrue to B, C, and D is not captured by the market, similar by the prices. Similarly, there is also something called as negative externality. In the case of negative externality, A's action has got negative effect on B, C, and D. For example, when individual A is not carrying on the required treatment of the pollutant from the firm, then it is polluting the water body. Now, when the water body is polluted, then B, C living near that water body is adversely affected because the firm has released the polluted water in that water body. Now, the cost can be bad health, it can be polluted water for use, and the third party, the other party, has to bear that problem of polluted water. So, this cost of using polluted water is not borne by the individual A. In such case, and it is not borne by the market, in such case we say that there is a negative externality which individual B, C, and D is experiencing because of the behavior of this individual A. So these kind of benefits and cost which is experienced by economic agents who did not participate in the decision making, therefore they do not pay the price for it, nor do they bear the cost for it. So these are experiences beyond the market system, but this happens on a very regular basis. Now let us see that with the help of a diagram it will become clearer. In this diagram you have two situations of the cost of production. So we have the marginal private cost of production of a firm. What is marginal private cost of production of a firm? That is the cost of raw material, of electricity, of labor, of whatever. All these are called as a marginal private cost of production. But actually in an economy, the supply cost is not only marginal private cost but also includes marginal social cost. Now, what is social cost? Now, social cost is those kind of cost which the society has to bear and which is not internalized by the firm. Now, let us see how it is happening here. Assume that a firm is polluting the water body. Now, when the firm is polluting the water body, an externality is experienced by people who live by the side of that water body. The cost of production of the good that this firm makes, as per the diagram, is at price P. The firm is able to sell the product at point P, and the quantity that will be sold by the firm is QE. That is a normal demand supply curve that is interacting, and we get quantity QE and prices P. Now, let us take the case when the firm is adding pollution or discharging untreated water into the water body. So, there is a certain cost that is involved, and that cost we can take it as MC. So, the cost of production, instead of being S equal to MPC, is now taken to the green line, which is the marginal social cost. So marginal social cost includes not only private cost but also the cost of the polluted water if he had to clean up the water. If this polluted water had to be treated by the firm, the firm would have incurred certain expenses to clean up the water. Now this firm, what it is doing is it is not spending that water on money on cleaning up the water, and it is sending out, releasing the untreated water into the water bodies. So that expense that the firm should have actually incurred is MC. So MC is the social cost which the firm is not taking up at all, and the plant chooses to release that polluted water into the water body. Now, what has happened by this action of the firm? By this action of the firm, the quantity produced is QE and the quantity is supplied at price. But suppose the firm, or because of the government rules, let us assume that the government has asked it to spend resources on cleaning up the water. In the case of cleaning up the water, the cost of cleaning up the water is MC. When the price or cost of cleaning up the water is MC, then the cost of production will rise, and therefore the price too will rise. The price will now rise from OP to OPS. OPS is a socially accepted price, and at that price you will also find that the quantity has reduced from OQE to OQS. The firm will produce less quantity because it has to bear cost on cleaning up the water. When the firm bears the cost of treating that polluted water, there are two things that happen. One is that the consumers will have to pay a higher price, they will get lesser quantity of goods in the market. It will also reduce the consumer's surplus. But in this particular case of externality, we would say that it is desirable for the consumer to pay at a higher price and get lesser quantity than to permit the firms to pollute the environment. On the other hand, what happens to this producer? The producer also, the producer produces quantity QE and now moves on to produce only PS. The producer produces less and thereby increases the welfare of the society by preventing this pollution to destroy the water body or to keep produce the reduction of the quantity. Now, what has happened is at QS, the consumer surplus is reduced, and at QE, DFG, that green triangle, is the loss of welfare to society in terms of less production. But when we look at price mechanism and externality, and this subject is studied more in detail in environmental economics, we will agree to it that it is better for the firm to incur that additional cost to treat the water, discharge, and then discharge it into the water body than to send polluted water into the what about it? So bearing that extra cost, if it is not borne, if it is not paid by the firm, then we would not have been able to capture that cost onto the society. This can happen for health, this can happen for environment, where the resources are actually the resource use is causing more harm to society than actually benefiting, and we may not be able to capture the entire cost of such activities. Now, there is another situation of market power. When market power is strong, where it means either the buyer or the seller possesses power to determine the price. Now, we assume that the buyer and the seller are price takers, but we also know the reality of imperfect market, and we know that the producer and the seller may acquire power in the process of being in the market. In such a case, the power prevents the consumer and the producer to arrive at the normal market determined prices. Rather, the price is determined by the control over either the supply factor or the demand factor. When firms interact in this way, like we saw in the case of oligopoly or monopoly, the firms settle a price which is not determined by the market but only determined by the firm and its profit motives. There can also be, besides the oligopoly and monopoly, there can be another situation where the opposite situation, which we call as oligopsony and monopsony. Oligopsony is a situation when there are large number of there are few sellers in the market. There are few buyers of that particular service in the market. Here, oligopoly is a few sellers in the market. Oligopsony is when there are only few buyers of that particular good or service or labor in the market. A particular raw material is used only by 4 or 5 firms. In such cases, this oligopoly firms can decide at what price they should buy the raw material from the suppliers in the market, because there are just 3 or 4 firms who buy that raw material. Even in the case of monopoly, there can be monopsony where only one firm buys the raw material or labor or other resources. So these kind of situations of imperfect markets can stop this market from working automatically and determining the price. In these cases, the market does not determine the price. It is the power of the oligopolist or the monopolist who can determine the price in the market. There are also the story of public goods which prevent the price mechanism from functioning. This price mechanism is also the public goods story is also a part of the subject of public finance, as much as it becomes a part of environmental economics. So in both the subject, we use these concepts of public goods. Here, public and other subjects also, but these prominently use the idea of public goods. So market failures arise in the supply of goods that are of public nature, in the sense that there are goods like that of parks. Parks, everybody likes to enjoy an evening in the park, but would not like to supply parks. In the sense, people would not be willing to pay for the parks. They are users of the park, and public goods like parks are non-excludable and non-rival. That means if one person uses the park, it does not prevent another person from using the park, and it is not, you cannot exclude one person and the other from using the park. So these non-excludable and non-rival public goods also experiences a situation where the market mechanism will not function. In such a case, the government has to move in who will supply these parks and lighthouses and bridges, because individually everybody would like to use them, but then nobody can pay, or nobody will pay for it. So either the society will, if left to the market, either the society will produce too much of something like a garbage, which is a public bad, because there are no controls over creating of garbage. So there could be too much of generation of garbage on one hand, and there could be too less production of goods which are of public good nature, like parks or bridges or anything. So here also the private market mechanism fails to get the actual demand and supply meet, and in this such cases the market actually fails to deliver what society needs at its optimum. So when we take up topics in environmental economics or in public economics, we shall look into this subject of public goods. There is another condition which makes this market mechanism not to work well, that is known as the situation of asymmetric information. Remember, when we were discussing perfect market, one of the features of perfect market was there is perfect knowledge between the buyer and the seller about the price and quantity in the market. Now, this actually does not happen in real life, and there is a lack of symmetry in knowledge. Lack of symmetry in knowledge means the buyer and the seller do not have equal amount of knowledge about the product that is being dealt with in the market. So when there's the one has more information than the other, when such a situation appears, then the decision that is taken may not be appropriate, and the price mechanism will not operate efficiently. For example, the buyers may have an ignorance. It is like watching a movie, going and watching a movie, or buying a particular book when we are ignorant about what we are likely to experience. In such a case, we may find that we have wasted money. Of course, today reviews are available, so more or less the information asymmetry that is prevalent about a movie that has just been released or a book that has been released is reduced. But there are still many, many commodities and services on which there is asymmetrical information. Example, that of doctors and car mechanics or a dentist. We may not have the information about what our requirement is. We have to depend upon the provider of that service. And if the provider of the service guides us to do a certain kind of to take a certain kind of a decision, we are at a loss, and we might take that kind of decision which may not be in the interest of the decision maker. So in such cases, we are talking about asymmetrical information. This is very useful in understanding health economics. It is also studied well in institutional economics, both of which I shall be making some presentation in course of time. Now, it could also mean that when there is a second-hand car to be sold, which is famously known as The Market for Lemons by George Ekerlof, that paper, there also we understand this, that is the place where we have discussed this asymmetric information that persists between the buyer and the seller. We can take another example where the buyer has more information than the seller. It could be in the case of philately, for example, stamp collection or art collection. The buyer may spot a piece of art or a stamp or a coin or something of that kind, which has got a very high collector's value. But the person who has it with him or her does not know the actual value of it. So there is here a situation where the buyer could get the commodity very cheap, and the seller actually lost out because he did not know what was the actual value of that particular item that he was selling away. That is why during this kind of situation, the buyer or the seller invariably lose out when they don't have information about the product that they are handling. So either one of them gets exploited in a situation like this, and we can see generally in the case of many services where the consumer is in no way in a position to exactly estimate what is the knowledge, especially in the case of health economics. But then we also know that acquiring of information is not costless. So there is what is known as a transaction cost. Again, that is a topic that we shall look into when we have presentations on institutional economics. That was the reason why I thought that this presentation on market failure is important, because many of the subjects of labor economics or environmental economics or public economics or institutional economics, all of them have their elements from market failure. There could be other reasons also for market failure. For example, the labor market can fail. In the labor market, the people who look for jobs may not get their jobs. And why does this labor market fail? It could fail for a variety of reasons. For example, it could be because of the education level, the skill level, the gender of the person who has applied for a job, or because of social mobility, any of these reasons are adequate enough for the market not to succeed, and in which case there will be excess supply of labor in the market. And there is another problem of common property resources. This again comes from the realm of environmental economics, which we shall be examining when we discuss topics in environmental issues. Common property resource like fishing, then grazing grounds, or we talk about forests. These are common grounds where these are common property. Now, who will take care of these properties, and who will pay for the use of these common properties? So there could be excessive fishing, or excessive use of meadows, or excessive use of forests, and therefore these natural resources could get overexploited. These are again causes where markets fail, and therefore there is a need for intervention. In short, what you're seeing is that markets fail in almost all sectors, and there is a need for government intervention. Markets can also fail because of inequality of income. Example here is that of vaccination to me. That comes up to my mind. There are a large number of people who will not have resources to pay for getting themselves vaccinated. Now, the question that will come to us is, should we leave them without getting vaccinated, or should they be vaccinated? Ideally, they should be vaccinated so that the society is safe and moves towards healthy society. But then these people do not have the resources, they do not have the money to spare for getting themselves vaccinated. In such cases, again, markets have failed. So when there is inequality of income, some people have got large amount of money, they can afford to do whatever they feel like. But even for a very basic need like vaccination, some people may not have money. In such a case, the markets have failed and the government has to step in. That is why precisely the vaccination drive for polio, for example, was done purely by the government, so that all children in the country are vaccinated against polio. Earlier it could be for smallpox, all were vaccinated by the government. And today for the COVID-19 also, the government has stepped in to decide to vaccinate its people, and a small portion has been left to those who can pay the price. So if the government does not vaccinate the poor people, and if it had left the entire vaccination process to the market mechanism, then we would have failed in vaccinating the largest number of people to prevent the spread of diseases. Sometimes government itself is a cause for market failure. In this particular case, when the government gives market subsidies for production, for example, when government gives subsidies for water, or for fertilizers, or for education, then these questions are whether they are being efficiently used by those who get it, or is it reaching the right kind of people who deserve it. In such cases, there might be overconsumption of some commodities, there could be underconsumption of commodities, there could be wastage of commodities. So such cases, the government itself becomes a cause for this market failure. Now, all these, the entire story that we have just um, uh, watched now, you can see that the entire system works in a free market economy, where the economy has gone in for privatization. So in a socialist economy, these things will not happen, because they would have anticipated all of these kind of failures, and the failures would have been more important than the successes of market working. And therefore the governments in a socialist economy provide for all these failures and prevents market from failing. There, in such economies, the prices are only used as a signal to say that there are shortages or there are excesses of anything that is produced. If there are shortages, then the government would produce more of it, and if there are abundance of some commodity in the market, then the government will take the clue that the goods have been produced in excess. Besides that, the government provides almost all the services. So, in a free market economy, in a capitalist mode of production, this market mechanism works. So, it is important to understand this working of the market mechanism, to understand the other subjects that are emerging issues and topics in other subjects that emerge from this topic of market failure. And that is why I thought that before I move into the other subjects of either health economics or environmental economics or public goods or environmental economics, any of or labor economics, in any of these subjects, we will need to understand these concepts or these ideas, because these ideas are developed in those papers. So thank you very much for watching this video.